We're back. This is we'll call it the inaugural relaunching, I guess, of Friday with Friends. Today we have a great friend with us today, Ross Sloan of Westtown Bank and Trust. Ross has been in the banking industry for how long?
Almost 36 years now. It'll be 36 years in June. So
it's
been a long time.
He could have raised children in the banking industry. You know what I mean? That amount of time. He could have brought them up behind him. So we got an expert in the field today. We're going to talk a little bit about business banking, but also about as it applies to our industry of hemp. Well, our industry, maybe that's your industry. But tell us a little about yourself, your story, and your background, and what led you to in the banking industry.
Gladly. Native of North Carolina. I've lived in North Carolina my entire life. Live in the Asheville area now.
Okay.
This area for almost 36 years. Started my career here and have been in the western part of North Carolina the entire time. My interest in banking was spurred by the fact that my father was a 38-year career banker.
Okay.
To be clear, he never really pushed me toward banking, but knowing that it was a job that he enjoyed at least piqued my interest. And so when banks came on campus when I was a senior in college for interviews, I interviewed with banks and ended up starting with First Union National Bank, which is now through a series of acquisitions and mergers, now part of Wells Fargo.
Yeah.
But started with them back in 1986. And again, all of it's been in North Carolina. Done a lot of different things in banking. I started on the retail side. My first 8 years were in retail banking. So either in branch management or managing clusters of branches. And then moved over to business banking, and I've done some commercial banking and what's referred to as middle market banking. So working with larger businesses, not big enough to be publicly traded typically, but fairly sizable businesses and municipalities. And then in early October of 2020, moved over to Westtown and able to be able to focus strictly on the hemp industry. I dabbled in banking with hemp-related businesses and really enjoyed it. When I got the opportunity to move to Westtown to focus on it, really had a lot of appeal.
Okay, so they were already into the hemp aspect before you came in.
They were, yes.
Okay.
They started in early 2020. I was with a different bank that was doing a little bit of banking in the hemp industry, but was not fully committed to it, was really just trying to see if there were opportunities there. And to that bank's credit, they gave me the opportunity, along with somebody in the compliance department and the chief risk officer, to put a program in place. And we were able to do some business, but it wasn't a full vertical like it is at Westtown. And so that's how I ran into Westtown. We were prospecting in some of the same areas. We were fishing in the same ponds.
Yeah, man, it works like that.
So we bumped into each other, and that's when they reached out to see if I would come over and work with Westtown, and it's been great.
See, sometimes you walk out there with a new fishing partner, isn't that right?
That's right.
Yes,
that's exactly right.
So you offer one of the few services that every single business needs, and most kind of truly know very little about. Like, we know that we need to go put money in, and we know that it's this vehicle to send money out as we need it. Briefly talk about business banking in 2022 and what that looks like now. What should people expect?
Yeah, and I'll address that both from a broad perspective and then also specific to hemp. Broadly, I don't think we'll see market changes in business banking, with a couple of exceptions. If you listen to the Federal Reserve, they're tipping their cards or tipping their hands to let us know there are probably going to be some rate increases this year. So prime rate's 3.25 right now. I would not be surprised if it goes to 4% over a series of raises over the year. So I would expect that. I need to be careful about predictions. I've been humbled by predictions enough. I probably shouldn't make them. I'll pick Kansas City to win the Super Bowl, so I don't know how much.
But I'm going to go against that. I'm going to say so.
but at any rate, I do think there's a good chance we will see increases in rates to kind of keep inflation at bay. And I think all of us know we'll continue to see technological innovations that will impact how people bank. I think there'll be more that's done electronically. Don't know the branches. Branches not going to go away over the course of the year, but I do think we'll see continued technological advances that will impact business banking. As far as hemp banking or banking for hemp businesses specifically, the one positive change that I think we'll see is I do think we will start to slowly see a little more loosening in credit. I want to be careful with that because credit is still very challenging in the hemp industry, and I think will continue to be through the course of this year. But we can now get USDA and SBA guarantees on loans to businesses in the hemp industry, and that makes it a little more palatable for banks. I don't think banks are going to enter the industry in scale that are not already in the industry, but I think those of us that are already in the space will likely be able to do a little more lending. And part of the reason for that is not only the SBA and USDA guarantees, which are helpful, but a lot of the businesses that are in the industry started in early 2019. So some of them are starting to get some historical, some numbers, financials that we can look at and see how.
Right. Okay. That makes
where we didn't have that before. Sort of irrespective of industry, credit officers understandably want to see a history to get a sense of what the business is capable of, and we're getting to the point in the industry where customers are able to provide that. So again, I want to be careful because it's still going to be tight, but I do think we'll see a little more lending in the space than we have so far.
I'm sure the rate going up helps the lender feel better about giving the money.
It does to a degree, but the margins will largely be about the same. I mean, we get a little better margin in higher rate environments, but that probably won't be heavily impacted with an increase. If it does go from prime does go from 3.25 to 4, our deposit rates will go up as well. And so we'll probably get a little bit of margin help, but not so much.
Well, what's the difference between, say, a national bank, a local bank, and a credit union? And mainly in services you get as a customer, because most people don't really know.
Yeah, it's a good question. And a lot of it has to do with how they're regulated. The larger banks, and the names that you would identify, I think most people would identify as the larger banks, are typically regulated by the OCC, or the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. A lot of smaller banks are regulated by the FDIC, and then credit unions have their own regulating bodies. So a lot of it has to do with how they're regulated. That typically is transparent to the customer. Where a customer might see a difference is both in physical locations. National banks generally going to have a lot more physical locations. State banks can operate in multiple states, but the national banks, just by size, are typically in a lot more locations. And then credit unions often have fewer locations and are restrictive to some degree about who can be a member of that credit union. For example, State Employees Credit Union, you either have to be a state employee or be a family member of somebody who's a state employee or has been. So there's a little more restriction usually in terms of who can be a member of a specific credit union. And one of the other distinctions has been historically that credit unions in particular have been more retail focused. They've been more focused on banking of individuals.
Okay.
But that's started to shift over time. We're seeing more and more credit unions that are getting into business banking. So we've seen a shift over the last 5 to 10 years in that regard. And one of the things a lot of bankers will tell you that's different about credit unions is they are typically less regulated and have fewer requirements from a regulatory standpoint. And that's always a beef of state banking associations in the American Bankers Association. So you'll often hear those folks call for a more even playing field, but that's again something that's not really germane to the customer base.
Right. Kind of like you let these little guys just run around and do whatever they want. Huh?
That's right. That's right. Exactly. So we whine about that. Yeah.
Well, if you had to forecast, what does the future of Canada banking look like? And I know you touched on that a little bit, and a more like immediate future, but 5 years from now, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, and I do think we will see more banks get into it. There are a lot of folks that have kind of felt like once the Safe Banking Act is passed, that there are going to be a bunch of banks that will enter the space. And I'm not sure that's true. I mean, I do think the Safe Banking Act, if and when it gets passed, will provide an additional level of comfort for some banks that may be on the sidelines, but it's not going to be a panacea. And the part of the reason for that is there are a variety of reasons that banks are not in the space right now. Some of them legitimate reasons. I mean, there are higher compliance costs with banking businesses and what's considered to still be a high risk industry by the regulators. I think a lot of banks are making good money and doing well without being in space. And so I think a lot of them are saying, hey, why do we need to be in it if we're doing well in all these other industries that we already know and understand? And then the reality is as well, just like in the general public, there's a lot of misunderstanding among bankers, just as there is in the general public about what hemp is and how it differs from cannabis and high THC cannabis. And so I see some of that as well. All that said, I do think over the next 5 years, we will see more banks start to get into the space, but not at a really fast pace. And incidentally, with the Safe Banking Act, it's passed the House, I think, 5 times now, and it's still not gotten through the Senate. And at this point, they're really kind of headwinds from both parties. On the right, there's some folks that just don't want anything to do with hemp or cannabis. And then on the left, you've got folks that want a broad cannabis act and don't want to carve out the Safe Banking Act as something separate. And so some of them are saying, like Cory Booker and Schumer are saying, look, we don't want a separate Safe Banking Act. We want a very broad, comprehensive cannabis act that would include it. And so there are a lot of headwinds for the Safe Banking Act right now. And then you combine that with the fact that there's so many issues being dealt with in Washington, it seems to just get kicked down the road.
Well, let's just say the Senate is very meticulous about which legislation they want to pass.
That's true.
Just leave it at
that. That's a whole nother and much longer call.
Yes, no doubt. We'll just leave them at that. Yeah. So you kind of said that the bigger banks are the only ones that seem like they have the pockets to absorb real estate for the purpose of banking. Like in the last couple of months, I go to, we're here in DC, we go to Baltimore. DC is sort of like a re-emergent city. I went down to Florida, and you see new banks, but they're all like the big banks. Those are the ones that are picking up real estate. You guys have 2 locations, if you like, one Illinois and Raleigh, according to your website, correct?
That's right.
And most all of your banking is done online. This is where banking is going. You kind of mentioned a little bit that earlier. So it's like the future of brick and mortar banking kind of going away.
I don't know that it will go away completely. At least in my career, I don't think it will go away completely. But to your point, we are definitely seeing that trend, even with the bigger banks. I mean, as you said, where you see new branches going up, it's typically the bigger banks. And I think the trend is going to be fewer branches and smaller branches that maybe do not provide all of the services and have all of the staff that we've seen in traditional branches heretofore. So in our case, we've been around for almost 100 years, but we really only have one branch, and that's in the Chicago area, as you mentioned, because that's where our bank started. Our corporate office is in Raleigh because that's where our holding company is headquartered. But in some ways, the fact that we didn't evolve into a brick and mortar model may have been just dumb luck. I mean, we just never evolved into that. And now that seems to be the direction that a lot of banks are going, as you said. And I do think we're definitely going to see a trend in that direction, particularly as the technology advances. But I think it's going to be a while before you see complete branchless banking, if ever.
But even on commercials now, like on TV, there's like Ally and all these other, non-location banks, right? And you always see, like, there are always young people in the commercials. So I guess they figure, like, once you get past a certain age, you're not making any new decisions. So so I just like, that's why I kind of asked that question. Like, I'm seeing that things that I talked about earlier on when I asked the question. So all these things look like, from the outside looking in, like, wow, like the world's changing again. You know,
it is. And to be clear, you're right. If you want to bank without ever going into a branch with the technology these days, you can do it. I mean, I bank with Westtown Bank. I don't foresee being in Chicago anytime soon, but I can do all my banking with Westtown and not have to worry about having a branch nearby. And to your point, there are other models like that are completely branchless, and they work. I just don't think our whole industry will be there for some time.
Okay, well, we try not to get this too long. We don't want to bore people. We and I could talk about this kind of stuff all day, but I don't know if everybody wants to listen to me running my mouth all day. But
or a boring banker at Asheville, North Carolina. So
hey, I don't know. Maybe I'm a boring guy, but this is kind of exciting stuff to me. We're at this sort of weird, exciting time. You are a true problem solver right now, because there's a lot of companies out there, small companies like ourselves, who cannot figure out where we can find reliable banking, much less for this particular industry. You're serving a need, and I don't know if enough people know. Hence, part of our mission for doing these interviews is not just what I say is we're using social media for good. So it's not just about look at me, but this is our community. These are people who are part of our community, and let's spotlight those people, So that said, we're going to wrap it up. And so you can go on with your Friday. First, we cannot ignore our shameless plug portion of the week. Everybody gets it. So this is where you promote yourself, your business, or product or service. You tell us 8 things you're excited about. You probably have promo codes at the bank, but so, wouldn't that be something? Yeah. So you got a minute on the clock, but let's tell us about anything you want to tell the people. Promote yourself.
I appreciate that. And the one thing that we like for folks, particularly in the hemp industry, to know is that we are completely dedicated to the hemp industry. And I think the fact that, if you look at the screen behind me, it says Hemp Banks here. We actually went out and trademarked that phrase because we wanted to send a message to the market that we're here to stay. It's an important industry for our bank, and we are committed to it. And one of the things that's different about our bank, if not unique, is that our hemp banking vertical it was actually started by our CEO, and it has unanimous support of our board of directors. And so what's different about that is I talk to people every week who say, I was banking with XYZ, seemed to be fine. Then all of a sudden the compliance officer said, no, we're not going to do this. Since our program started with our CEO, everybody in our bank is supportive of it, including all of our compliance officers. We have dedicated compliance officers for the hemp space. And so what we tell people we offer is not only banking services, but the ability to sleep knowing that you're not going to get a call the next day saying, hey, we're not in the hemp space anymore. You need to find another bank.
And that has been a real problem over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Ross, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are very happy to hear this. All you businesses out there, you small hemp businesses, don't get frustrated. Don't give up. Call Russ. He'll help you out. He'll plug you guys in, so you can sleep at night knowing that you have banking that every single business in the United States needs. Ross, we're going to wrap it up today. Thank you, man. Thank you for your time. Thank you for this valuable information that you're sharing with us. And if you're up to it, maybe we'll have a part 2 of this conversation a little bit later in the year, as things progress. I'd like to talk to you a little bit next time about how cryptocurrency is changing the way not only banks view the world, but the way the world is viewing banking.
Absolutely. Would love to do that. This has been fun, and I appreciate the opportunity. Good to see you.
All right. Again. Thank you so much. You have a great day.
Take care.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.